Good morning. It is so good to see you guys this morning, and I don't know what it is, but after a day like yesterday, it just seems like I feel more joyous, more happy. I think it might be just the relief of anyway, whatever reason, it feels really good to be here today and to worship with you all. If you knew that you only had a few days, few weeks, few months, what would you want to pass on to your children? What kind of things would you want to tell them to prepare them for? You know, tell them where the hidden can of cash is in the backyard. maybe prepare them for, once I'm gone, here's the situation with the finances or whatever, You might want to pass on to them that you love them, that you care about them, that you want what's best for them. If you were going to look into God's Word and see what God would have you to know, to pass on to you. Moses, when he knew that it was towards the end of his life, when he knew that his life was about to end, he began to tell the story of everything that he had experienced. He went back to Egypt in his mind, and he began to tell the people about how the Lord had delivered him from Egypt. And in the book of Deuteronomy, he tells his story. From then to what would have been his present day. And he's preparing him, he's telling him all about these things. And in the process of telling him all about these things, he begins to tell them, be sure and tell your children. Be sure and let them know these things. Because they weren't there. You were. You saw it. Your father and mothers, they saw it. But your children, your grandchildren, they need to know these things. And I want you to make sure that they don't forget what God has done. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, we're going to start in verse 1 here, and we're going to read just a little bit here. But I want you to just think about it for a minute. The things that you would want for your children. You would really want them to be happy, wouldn't you? Wouldn't that be important to you? You would want them to be safe, to know that they were secure and safe. You would want them to know, that they knew who God was and what He'd done. You would want to know that they were going to be with you in heaven someday. Those are some of the things that we would probably look at and say, I want them to know these things. Well, let's look and see what Moses passes on. In chapter 4 and verse 1, Deuteronomy, hear now, O Israel, the decrees and the laws that I am about to teach you. Follow them so that you may live and may go in and take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of our fathers, is giving you. Do not add to what I command you, and do not subtract from it, but keep the commands of the Lord your God that I give you. Two things here. I'm going to give you these commands. Don't add to them, and don't subtract from them. We often tend to add to things or subtract from them as we like or dislike something. But he says, don't add to it. Don't take away from it. Just obey the commands that I'm giving you. Verse 3, you saw with your own eyes what the Lord did at Baal Peor. The Lord your God destroyed from among you everyone who followed Baal of Peor. But all of you who held fast to the Lord your God are still alive today. The importance of obeying Him could be life and death. And so He's warning them to be careful for their life. He goes on, see, I have taught you decrees and laws as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you may follow them in the land that you are entering, to take possession of it. Observe them carefully, for this will shows your wisdom and understanding to the nations who will hear about all of these decrees and say, surely this great nation is wise and understanding people. I love that part. Can you imagine, in the day of Solomon, for instance, when Solomon was in charge of the nation of Israel, and it was the largest territory that Israel, before or after, ever lived to see. And this whole territory was under Solomon. And people from all over the place would come to ask Solomon's advice, because he was known as being the wisest man. When God asked him, I want to give you something. Would you rather have riches? I think he said long life or wisdom. He chose wisdom. That's what he wanted. God gave him an extra measure of wisdom. And people knew it. People came from all over to hear what he would advise, what you would give advice. Moses here is talking to the people, and he says, the nations around you, if you listen to my commands, if you follow what God has told me to pass on to you, people around you are going to say, wow, that nation's really got it together. Look what they're doing. Look how wise they are. Now, our tendency is to look at God's commands and say, well, the world's wisdom is smarter, right? But it's not. He goes on, verse 7. What other nation is so great as to have their gods near them, the way the Lord our God is near us when we pray to him? And what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws that I am setting before you today? Whenever you look at the history, archaeology, and you look at the different nations and the laws that they had, their laws were selfish, oftentimes with a degree of retribution given for something that happened. They weren't love. They were what to do to get even with someone else. Those kind of things. But he says here that these laws, these decrees are righteous decrees. These laws are here to benefit us. And I love also that he's talking about God, and he says, what other nation has a God that lives with them, that goes with them, that hears them, that speaks to them? Most of the gods around in that day, well, all of the gods that they had in those days, would have been carved out of rock, out of wood. They would worship the stars, the moon, the things around them. But none of those things would speak to them. And none of those things heard them. And he says, they can't hear you. They're mute. They can't speak. So our God hears us. He listens to us, and he speaks to us. And he helps us along the way. But he says in verse 9, a warning, only be careful and watch yourself closely so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen, or let them slip from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. Remember the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when he said to me, assemble the people before me to hear my words, so that they may learn to revere me as long as they live in the land, and may teach them to their children. You came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, while it blazed with fire to the very heavens, with black clouds and deep darkness. I wanted to picture that for a moment. A few years ago, I decided to tear out some Russian olives on our property. I made this pile. And it was a little bigger than it should have been, and a little bit bigger around than it should have been. But I lit it on fire thinking, this is going to take a little while to go. Those flames were shooting well over 100 foot high. And I was standing well over 100 foot away, and it was too hot for me to get close to it. Think about this mountain. The top of the mountain is ablaze. And the blackness in the sky from the smoke, I'm assuming. And God is speaking from the mountain. How would that make you feel? I I mean, I was scared of the flames. I mean, that was kind of frightening to see those flames lipping up, especially since the high power lines were going overhead. That was extra concerning. But don't, I won't post this on Facebook. But when you think about this, and you think about standing at the foot of this mountain and hearing God speak, seeing the mountain is ablaze, but it's not burning out. That would be an awesome feeling. It was so awesome that it frightened him. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the fire, verse 12. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. He declared to you his covenant, the 10 commandments which he commanded you to follow, and then wrote them on 2 tablets. And the Lord directed me at the time to teach you the decrees and laws that you are to follow in the land, and that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. I want you to know these laws. I want you to know these regulations. So he speaks it to them. What other gods can do that? What other gods have done that? There is no other God. You saw no form of any kind the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. Therefore watch yourself very carefully, so that you do not become corrupt and make for yourself an idol, an image, or any shape, whether formed like a man or a woman, or like any animals on earth, or any bird that flies in the air, or like any creatures that moves along the ground, or any fish in the water below. And when you look up at the skies and see the sun, the moon, and stars, all the heavenly array, do not be enticed into bowing down to them and worshiping things the Lord your God has appointed to all the nations under heaven. But as for you, the Lord took you and brought you out of the iron smelting furnace, out of Egypt, to be the people of his inheritance, as you now are. How many times have you seen an idol, something that people bow down to, worship, whether it be a Buddha or an image, a statue? How many times do people bow down and pray to an idol? Maybe not as much anymore as it used to be, but today we also worship things. We worship people. We bow down to maybe an athlete, a movie star, a performer of some kind. They can be an idol too. He says even the stars, the moon, the things of this world can become an idol to us. He says, don't let any of those things become more important to you than I am. Make sure that nothing takes the place of me. And you might think about that for a minute, and you might say, well, that was kind of a selfish thing for God to do. Why would he want all the attention? Why would he want us to devote it all to him? It's not selfish at all, because he knows that he is the only one that can save you. He knows that if you get sidetracked, lost in all of these other things, thinking that this will be the answer, this will be the salvation, this will be our hope, we get lost in those things, then we will forget who has delivered us from Egypt, who has done these things for us, who has died for us so that we can have eternal life. If we forget that by worshiping other things or other people or other statues or anything else, then we lose the promise that he's given us. He says he's a jealous God. Not jealous in the way that we think of a husband and wife being jealous. Not that kind of jealousy. A jealousy that talks about, I want you to be my child. I want you to be part of my family. I don't want you to go to other places because I know that that's not safe. I know those things are going to lead you astray. I want you to be with me. I want you to have communion with me. So I don't want you being distracted by all of these other things. I want your devotion. And so God tells us how we can do that. In verse 21, chapter 4, The Lord was angry with me because of you, and he solemnly swore that I would not cross the Jordan and enter the good land the Lord your God is giving you as your inheritance. I will die in this land. I will not cross the Jordan. But you are about to cross over and take possession of the good land. But be careful not to forget the covenant of the Lord your God that he made with you. Do not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything the Lord your God has forbidden. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. After you have had children and grandchildren and have lived in the land a long time, if you then become corrupt and make any kind of idol, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord your God and provoking him to anger, I call heaven and earth as witness against you this day, that you will quickly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. You will not live there long, but will certainly be destroyed. The Lord will shatter you among the peoples, and only a few of you will survive among the nations to which the Lord will drive you. There you will worship man-made gods of wood and stone, which cannot see or hear or eat or smell. But if from there you seek the Lord your God, you will find him if you look for him with all of your heart and with all of your soul. When you are in distress and all of these things have happened to you, then in later days you will return to the Lord your God and obey him. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon you or destroy you or forget you, or the covenant that he has made with your forefathers, which he confirmed to them by oath. God is a jealous God, not because he wants all of the praise and honor. That's a reflection of our love for him. But what he wants us to obey him. He wants us to follow him because he's concerned about your welfare. He's concerned about your future. He doesn't want you to be distracted and left to be destroyed. But if you do, if you turn against God and you go to the other nations and you worship their gods, when you remember God, come back to him because he is a merciful God and he loves you and he wants you in his family and he welcomes you back. What a beautiful thought. What a beautiful thought to think that the God who created us, who made us, who watches over us, who wants us, is willing to accept us back when we make mistakes, when we fail. When we even intentionally go against him, when we return to him, he wants us back and he accepts us. That's a beautiful story. You see, Moses is looking at the land that he has heard about for years, that he has led these people to. For 40 plus years, he has led them in the wilderness and seen them to their destination, even when they betrayed God and God disciplined them. He saw them through that. And he gets to the edge of the promised land and he sees that they can conquer these nations. They conquered the nations on this side of the Jordan, but the promised land is actually the other side of the Jordan. But he knows that this is going to happen. And God says, no, you can't go into this land. And Moses says, I can't go in there, but you guys get to go in. Don't forget what God has done for you. If you do, you're going to be sucked into the world. You'll be tempted to worship other gods. Remember what he's done for you. To make this a little bit applicable to you and I, how many times has God blessed us, done things for us, and we've even acknowledged it. We thank him for it, and we're sincere. We appreciate that. And then weeks, months, years later, we look and we think to ourselves, what's God done for me? You know? We forget sometimes, and we slip into the things of this world. But in truth, God is with us, and he does care about us, and he wants what's best for us. All of these examples that he's given us and the things that he's done for us, in verse 32 of in chapter 4, he says, ask now about the former days, long before your time, From the day God created man on the earth, ask from one end of the heavens to the other, has anything so great as this ever happened? Or has anything like it ever been heard of? Has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of the fire as you have and lived? Has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another nation by testing miraculous signs and by wonders, by war and by mighty hand? Speaking of his people being taken out of Egypt. And an outstretched arm, and by great and awesome deeds, like all of the things that the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes. They saw all of that. They witnessed it. They were part of it. Have you ever seen anything like that? He says, remember that. You were shown these things so that you might know that the Lord is God. Besides him, there is no other. From heaven he made you hear his voice to discipline you. On earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words from out of the fire, because he loved your forefathers and chose their descendants after them. He brought you up out of Egypt by his presence and his great strength, to drive out before you nations greater and stronger than you, and to bring you into their land, to give it to you for your inheritance, as it is today. All of these things he did. But listen to the next part. Acknowledge and take to heart this day that the Lord is God. In heaven above and on earth below, there is no other. Keep his decrees and commands, which I am giving you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may live long in the land of the Lord, and that your God gives you for all times. There's two things. There's a promise of good if you follow God's commands and do his will. And there's also a promise that things will not go well with you if you do not follow God's commands. So I just went and looked up a few of them. In Deuteronomy 4 and verse 40, keep this decree and commands which I am giving you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, that you may live long in the land of the Lord your God, and that gives you for all times. Deuteronomy 5:16. Honor your father and mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live long, and that it may go well with you in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Deuteronomy 8:16. He gave you manna to eat in the wilderness, something your ancestors had never known, to humble and test you, so that in the end it might go well with you. Deuteronomy 11:8 and 9. Observe therefore all the commands that I am giving you today, so that you may have the strength to go in and take over the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, and so that you may live long in the land the Lord swore to your ancestors to give to them and their descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. Deuteronomy 25:15. You must have accurate and honest weights and measures, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. I made a note of one other one here in Deuteronomy 4:10. Remember the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when he said to me, assemble the people before me to hear my words, so that they may learn to revere me as long as they live in the land, and may teach them to their children. And Deuteronomy 6 and verse 2. I don't know how come I jumped around so much, but anyway. So that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. He's given us these commands so that we can enjoy the long life. What about us today? He gives us his word as a guide, as something that we could go to and know the wisdom of God. You realize that Adam and Eve sinned because they wanted to have the wisdom of God? And he's given us his wisdom for us to learn from. For us to to learn about who He is and how much He loves us, how much He cares about us. Sometimes I think we've taken that for granted. He's given us this so that we can enjoy a long life. I use this illustration every once in a while, that the idea that child running out into the street and you're responsible, adult, babysitter, parent, whatever, you're the responsible party, and you see this child that you're responsible for running towards the street and you see a truck coming. What you do? You yell at you, you run after him, you grab him, you bring him back in the yard, and you yell at him. Don't ever do that again. You know, that's our reaction. Why? Because we're concerned about him. We're afraid for him. We don't want that to happen to them. God knows us. He knows what we're like. Moses is warning us because he knows our tendencies. He's seen it. He says, don't do it again. Don't you run out in that road again, because I know what's going to happen. One of these times you're going to get hit. So he's concerned for us, and he loves us. In chapter 5 of Deuteronomy, he goes through the 10 Commandments, and I won't read this, but I think it's a great opportunity to mention that both in Exodus chapter 20 and here in Deuteronomy chapter 5, he goes through the 10 Commandments. And in expressing these 10 Commandments, I want you to hear the first part of it. Moses summoned all Israel and said, "Hear, O Israel, the decrees and the laws I declare in your hearing today. Learn them and be sure to follow them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our fathers that the Lord made this covenant, but with us, with all of us who are alive here today. The Lord spoke to you face to face out of the fire of the mountain. At that time I stood between the Lord and you to declare to you the word of the Lord, because you were afraid of the fire and did not go up on the mountain. And he said, I am the Lord your God, who brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." And he goes on to tell us the commandments there. But he's reminding us again that follow these commandments. Don't forget it. Chapter 6 is one of my favorite chapters because he's driving the point home again. Don't forget. Write it on your hearts. Remember it. Write it on the doorpost. We last week went to Miguel and Giselle's place and wrote all over their house to remind them not to fall away from the Lord, to remember to follow His will. And he tells us, write it on your hearts, write it on your foreheads, write it on your hands, write it everywhere. Because I don't want you to forget this. It's important. Remember the Lord and what He's done for you. So many times I think we get sidetracked by other things, and other things become more important to us, and we forget about His grace, His mercy, His love, and all that He's promised us, and we take other things and we make it our God. But He gives us a chance to come back to Him. He's inviting you back. I started out asking you the question, what would you tell your children if you knew you only had a few days? What would you tell your grandchildren, great-grandchildren? Wouldn't it be the most important thing to share with them about the Lord? To give them an opportunity to come to know who has the power of saving them? More than sports, more than money, more than jobs, more than anything else in this world, He wants us to know Him. That's what's important.